Chapter 726. Team Blue Rain's New Talent. Ah, so this is Scarlet Cloud Taoist, right? Lu Hanwen's voice revealed his youth. He was definitely a kid. Pitch of his voice still possessed the innocence of childhood. He was even younger than Gao Yingji and Chao Yifan. Yeah, this is Scarlet Cloud Taoist, right? Blue River said as he controlled Blue Bridge Spring Snow. He wasn't surprised at Lu Hanwen's amazement. Lu Hanwen was only 14 years old. How long could he have been playing Glory for? Scarlet Cloud Taoist Right's era of splendor took place when the Heavenly Domain had just been released. Even Blue River hadn't been a part of the first wave. By the time Lu Hanwen started playing Glory, Scarlet Cloud Taoist Right had already become an outdated leveling area. No one came to the Heavenly Domain at level 50 to level up, except for that guy, of course. Thinking of that god, Blue River couldn't help but look at the Blade Master, Flowing Cloud, next to him. This character was the kid's, not the guild's. Lu Hanwen came running over, saying that the team had told him to come over and that he was from the training camp. Blue River obviously understood the implications. Lu Hanwen was probably someone who Team Blue Rain considered as their future star. A Blade Master. Could the team be raising the successor to Huang Shaoshan's troubling reign? But Huang Shaoshan was still at his peak, right now. Wasn't it too early to look for a successor? Then again, Lu Hanwen was still very young. Maybe the team planned on raising him for a few years? Team Blue Rain indeed had this kind of tradition. If there was someone with talent from the training camp, they wouldn't hesitate to add him to the team. Wow. It's so beautiful. Every single room has a symbol of a red cloud. Lu Hanwen clearly didn't have as many thoughts as Blue River did. As soon as they stepped into Scarlet Cloud Taoist Right, he ran around all of a sudden like he was here to tour around the place. Hey, slow down, Blue River shouted. He and the troops chased after him. After just a few steps, they alarmed quite a few monsters. Even though Scarlet Cloud Taoist Right looked like a small city, it was still a leveling area and not an actual city. Every NPC was hostile and would actively seek to attack players. These were only level 50 or so monsters though, so they were easily beaten. Alarming a few monsters wouldn't be an issue. At this moment, Blue River suddenly noticed that no matter where Lu Hanwen's flowing cloud went, not even a single monster would be alarmed. Is it coincidence? Or is it, Blue River thought. He naturally began paying more attention to Flowing Cloud's movements. Soon afterwards, he saw Flowing Cloud zigzag left and right swiftly and then continue running forward as if nothing had happened. This is... Blue River looked around. Sure enough, there was a monster on either side, wandering about. When Flowing Cloud zigzagged, he threaded his way through the gap between their aggro radii. Yes, that should be what he did. Blue River could only guess because he couldn't clearly distinguish the aggro ranges of those two monsters. But from looking at Flowing Cloud, Blue River could ascertain that Lu Hanwen had purposely avoided their aggro range. Avoiding the aggro range of a monster wasn't difficult, but Lu Hanwen did it so swiftly. Only someone with a good eye to judge the situation and precise control over one's character could take the path that Flowing Cloud had just taken. For example, if Blue River wanted to avoid those two monsters, he would have needed to wait for the two monsters to be a little farther apart before rushing through the gap between their aggro radius. But Lu Hanwen? He accurately managed to determine the gap between their aggro radii and moved through the tiny gap. It was definitely a move that surpassed a normal player's capabilities. It was unnecessary to dodge these monsters though. With their strength, these monsters could be killed with just a few hits. There was no need to waste so much effort with such precise microing, but what about for Lu Hanwen? It looked like the kid didn't think of it as anything troublesome. He continued to use this sort of excessively high-end technique to avoid all the weak monsters. This kid really is skilled, Blue River couldn't help but say his thoughts to a teammate. What do you mean? As expected, the others didn't even notice because of their difference in skill level. Those who came to kill a level 55 wild boss were just hastily gathered troops. The elites had gone over to fight the level 65 one. Just watch him more carefully and you'll know, Blue River said. Minnesota. Just when Blue River finished speaking, several players cried out in astonishment. Blue River turned around to look, but didn't see anything unusual, so he asked, "What is it? What is it?" So fast, someone next to Blue River said. Who? That kid. He killed off that monster in an instant. How many skills did he use? The person replying asked himself. Who knew when Lu Hanwen had suddenly become excited, but he suddenly found a monster to kill, causing the Blue Brook Guild players to cry out in surprise. Blue River knew that although these players weren't elites, they were still sent out to compete for a wild boss. They wouldn't be much worse than the elite players and could still be considered as top players within the heavenly domain. For them to be so astonished, Lu Hanwen must have showed some terrifying skill. How incredible! Will he be a part of Team Blue Rain next season? He's a blade master. Could it be? They guessed all sorts of things. Blue River was filled with curiosity and expectations for this kid. Let's hurry. We can watch more carefully when we fight the boss, Blue River urged everyone to hasten their pace. He was also impatient to see this scene. In the end, they failed to catch up to Lu Hanwen's flowing cloud. That guy charged forward without stopping to take a break. Blue River checked his coordinates. He wasn't running around randomly. He was heading towards where the boss had spawned. It was just that he quickly lost them. Soon afterwards, they saw a message from Flowing Cloud, "Everyone, hurry up. I'm already here." "We're coming," Blue River replied. Everyone advanced forward hastily until they arrived inside the flower garden of Scarlet Cloud Taoist Rite. Flowing Cloud was hopping around the rock garden. This kid just can't stay still, can he? Blue River had accompanied him the entire way, so he had a small grasp of Lu Hanwen's personality now. Lu Hanwen was the type of person who just couldn't sit still. "Ah, you're here. Hurry, he's here. I saw her." Flowing Cloud jumped and shouted when he saw Blue Brook Guild. Careful, Blue River saw a figure hidden in the rock garden. A bright light flashed and a bullet headed towards Flowing Cloud. Bang! Everyone saw the bullet fly out from the gun, drawing an arc through the air. It missed. Flowing Cloud was able to dodge the sudden attack at such a close range. Blue River didn't dare to say it was because of his warning. He felt like he had yelled it out right as the gunshot rang. He reckoned that the sound from the gunshot was louder than his warning from Lu Hanwen's perspective. Typing out a warning didn't need to be said. Blue River couldn't type that fast. Lu Hanwen dodged it on his own. The bullet whizzed by. While in midair, Flowing Cloud slashed down at the half-hidden figure. Falling Phoenix Slash. Too many people could throw out this skill, but Lu Hanwen performed the move as he was doing a 180-degree spin in midair. It looked the same as a berserker doing a reverse collapsing mountain. The advantages of doing it in such a way could clearly be seen. The angle was lower, so the attack would be more thorough. A sword light flashed and Flowing Cloud descended. He was soon together with that figure behind the rock garden. Blue River and everyone else hurried over. It hadn't even been 10 seconds yet, when Flowing Cloud hopped back onto the rock garden and shouted at them, "Hurry up. I already killed him." It had only been 10 seconds. Even though Blue River knew Flowing Cloud had an exceptional set of equipment, the guild had provided him with a full set of orange equipment. Killing a same-level opponent in 10 seconds couldn't be done just through advantage in equipment though. His hand speed must be extremely fast too. "I got a gun. Does anyone want it?" Seeing that everyone had arrived, Flowing Cloud waved his hand and threw the weapon on the ground. It was the gun that had just dropped from the gunner. Blue River had Blue Bridge Spring Snow walk over. He picked up the gun to take a look. It was a level 70 purple weapon shining rifle. The slow attack speed was the gun's flaw, but it was a purple weapon from a 100-player dungeon raid. Just from this gun alone, the person shouldn't have been too weak. Even so, he had been destroyed by Lu Hanwen in just 10 seconds. This kid was terrifyingly talented. Thinking of how Lu Hanwen was only 14 years old and would be raised by the team for several more years, Blue River couldn't help but feel excited for Team Blue Rain's future. What guild was that player from? Blue River didn't forget to ask who attacked them. Parade, Lu Hanwen replied. No way, Blue River was astonished. Everyone knew which guilds comprised of the 4-guild alliance. Parade was one of them. If someone from Parade had hidden himself here, didn't it mean that the alliance was going to come fight for the level 55 wild boss? Did they not receive news of the level 65 boss spawning? Blue River felt like since the alliance depended on Yi Chu, they had no way of fighting two fronts at once. If they had to choose between a level 55 and a level 65 boss, of course they would go for the level 65 one. So why did they choose the level 55 one? I'm sure that he was from Parade. What is it? Lu Hanwen could the surprise from Blue River. If it's them, then we have a very troublesome opponent, Blue River said. Who? Lu Hanwen asked. Yi Chu, Blue River said. Ah, he really is troublesome, Lu Hanwen suddenly gasped. Oh, you also know about him? Yeah. The captain and Huang Shaoshan said Yi Chu was the most troublesome opponent they've ever faced, Lu Hanwen said. Chapter 727. Ambushed. Yi Chu's group was almost at Scarlet Cloud Taoist Rite, but midway through, Parade's guild leader, Martial Awareness, received a report that the player ahead, who had discovered the boss, had been killed. The scouts in the level 55 areas were actually oftentimes the more trustworthy part-time players, because level 55 areas usually didn't have any players, so they naturally wouldn't receive any kind of information. The dead player at Scarlet Cloud Taoist Rite was someone Martial Awareness knew of. This player's skill and equipment weren't bad. He was just one person though. If the other guilds noticed him, of course he would die. As a result, Martial Awareness didn't think too much of his death. The sacrificed player knew the risks involved, so Martial Awareness didn't say any consoling words. Instead, he immediately asked, which guild arrived first? Blue Brook Guild. Oh, Blue Brook Guild. That's fine, Martial Awareness let out a sigh of relief. They were only worried about tyrannical ambition. If it was just Blue Brook Guild, they shouldn't run into much trouble with God Yi Chu leading the group. The other side soon replied, Blue Brook Guild has an expert on their side. Expert? How skilled is he? Martial Awareness snorted disdainfully. With God Yi Chu watching over their battle, let alone an in-game expert, even a normal pro player wouldn't be an issue. Last week, Team Howling Heights had the best rookie, but didn't he get swept away by God Yi Chu? In any case, I was still trying to figure out what was going on when I died. It probably took him around 10 seconds to kill me. He made his move so quickly, the scout replied in an instant, as if he wanted to show that his hand speed was nothing to scoff at. 10 seconds. Marital Awareness immediately refocused when he heard that number. For a normal player, let alone an actual human opponent, most probably wouldn't be able to even beat a sandbag in 10 seconds. This expert truly wasn't simple. Martial Awareness immediately told Yi Chu and the other 3 guild leaders. 10 seconds. Sure enough, everyone was shocked by this number. What class? Yi Chu finally asked. Martial Awareness didn't know, so he hastily asked the scout. Blade Master, Martial Awareness soon replied. Could it be Huang Shaoshan? Whitestream blurted out. A Blue Brook Guild Blade Master killing someone in 10 seconds. It would be strange if they didn't think of Huang Shaoshan. He says it probably isn't. Martial Awareness had clearly asked the scout beforehand. How does he know? Whitestream asked. Because when that guy attacked, he was silent the entire time, Martial Awareness said. Oh, everyone reacted instantly. Whitestream nodded his head, then it probably wasn't him. Was it an ambush? Yi Chu asked. No, Martial Awareness replied, it was my guy who ambushed the Blade Master, but the Blade Master dodged it and fought back. The Blade Master's name? Lulan asked. Flowing Cloud, Martial Awareness said. Lulan immediately flipped through his archives. Online documents were very convenient. He Ctrl-F'd Flowing Cloud and returned to the game in 5 seconds. I don't have any information on him. What about you guys? The other guild leaders did the same thing. They all replied in the same manner, no idea. Never heard of him. He was able to kill an expert from the heavenly domain within 10 seconds. He must be a pro-level player, but if it's Blue Rain, who else could it be but Huang Shaoshan? Yi Chu couldn't think of anything. Let's hurry. We can't lose the boss, Yu Zikan said. They only had one scout at Scarlet Cloud Taoist Rite, and he had just died. If Blue Brook Guild started attacking the boss without any other guilds there to interfere, they could lure the boss to who knows where. We should hurry, Yi Chu said. During this discussion, they were still moving forward. They soon reached the entrance to Scarlet Cloud Taoist Rite. After passing through the gate with the word on top of the Scarlet Cloud insignia, they ran to the boss's last known location. It would take some time for Blue Brook Guild to lure the boss away. In the best case scenario, another guild would have started fighting with Blue Brook Guild for the boss. It's just up ahead. Everyone, hurry, Martial Awareness called out. The information came from his guild, so he knew the coordinates the best. As they approached, a wooden sign on their group's right side suddenly splintered. A person, bent like a small shrimp, flew out the window. While in the air, he straightened his body and a sword light slashed towards them. The group suddenly went into an uproar. None of them expected an ambush. Speaking of which, they were usually the ones who did the ambushing. The sword light came swiftly. It could be seen just how fast this ambusher was. The players directly in the path of the skill were flustered, stumbling to the left and right. The sword light passed by them and a small gap now appeared in the formerly compact troop formation. The ambusher dropped down from the small window. He wasn't done attacking yet. He raised his sword and countless shadows suddenly leapt out from it. Formless Phantom Blade. This ambusher was able to complete such a complicated high-level move in such a short amount of time. He executed the skill as soon as he touched the ground. Sword light assaulted the ground. This high-level skill wasn't targeting a specific person, but rather the small gap in their troop formation. The troops hadn't reacted fast enough after seeing the ambusher use a high-level skill, when the sword light struck them. A spurt of blood flew out from everyone. Formless Phantom Blade's final attack was sent out. The strong knockback effect hit one player, who sent the entire line of players behind him crashing to the ground. Fast. Too fast. It was so fast that they weren't able to keep up. Using Formless Phantom Blade in a group of enemies wasn't a wise move. The high-level skill had little starting lag and was a fierce attack, but the ending lag was an issue. After the blow-away effect ended, the Blade Master sheathed his sword. He looked quite cool, actually, but to the players right now, it made them feel disgusted. Because they were stunned by the sudden ambush, Formless Phantom Blade was a success. By the time everyone managed to recover, the Blade Master could move again. The Blade Master jumped lightly. His feet had barely left the ground before immediately jump cancelling with a falling silver blade. The shockwave dispersed outwards and the nearest players crashed to the ground. The Blade Master then utilized a triple slash to chase after the players who had been sent flying by Formless Phantom Blade's final attack. Those players were just about to get up, when they were thrown back onto the ground again with a light tap. The four Guild Alliance's troops had been split in two by a single person. Many of them suddenly felt like they woke up from a dream. When they looked left and right, they saw that, apart from that attack, it was completely silent. The ambush had been done by just one person? Flowing Cloud. This Blade Master was Lu Yuan's Flowing Cloud. Yi Shu and the others, who were at the very front of the troops, looked back and immediately identified him. They also saw how he had split apart their troops. This person was very frightening. Ignore him. Keep pushing forward. Clerics, keep up the healing, Yi Shu ordered. The four guild leaders were surprised. This little guy was brave enough to ambush all of them alone. No matter how skilled he was, he wouldn't survive if they all attacked. They thought that they should teach this arrogant guy a lesson, but God Yi Chu unexpectedly gave a different order. Was even God Yi Chu scared of him? The four guild leaders may have a lot of thoughts, but they still followed Yi Shu's order. The troops were in an uproar when they heard the order, but they also complied. Yi Shu said to the four guild leaders, "You guys keep going. I'll go provide support to the rear." Oh. Little hands, come with me. Yi Shu didn't explain himself to the four guild leaders. He called for Little Cold Hands. Little Cold Hands didn't say anything and followed behind Yi Shu's enlightened lord to the rear. After Lu Yuan's Flowing Cloud had split apart the troops, he didn't stop to take a break and attacked the left side, but it was as if the troops couldn't see him and just continued forward. Only the clerics were doing something by healing the injured players. Lu Yuan was also surprised. He attacked once, twice, thrice, but everyone just ignored him. These troops seemed to only care about running forward. It was as if his attacks were like scratches from low-level monsters. However, Flowing Cloud wasn't lacking in damage. He had a full set of orange equipment. In the game, he was most definitely at the top. Every single one of his attacks made the clerics suck in a cold breath. Even so, everyone was able to endure the attacks without any signs of fighting back. Because the four guild leaders had given them clear orders, ignore him and continue forward. Clerics, heal the injured. Why aren't you guys fighting back? Lu Yuan finally asked in bewilderment. Everyone was astonished by how his voice sounded. This person was clearly still a little kid. At this moment, someone replied to him, because we have more important things to attend to. Lu Yuan located the source of the words. Two clerics were walking towards him. Blue River had informed him that Enlightened Lord was one of God Yi Chu's alternate accounts. Senior Yi Chu, Lu Yuan asked. That's me. Who are you? Yi Shu asked. My name is Lu Yuan. Lu Yuan introduced himself rather loudly. Lu Yuan? Yi Shu was sure that he had never heard this name before. He was clearly a new player that Team Blue Rain was investing in. He was probably from the training camp, so the public wouldn't know of his existing. Team Blue Rain found quite a talented player. Yi Shu sighed. Lu Yuan's flowing cloud suddenly charged towards him. 8 Shadows. Chapter 728. Really troublesome. Shadow Steps. 8 Shadows. In the finals, Huang Shaoshan used 7 shadows, and that was more than enough to make the crowd go wild. In the entire alliance, the only Blade Master who could use more than 7 shadows was Team Tiny Herb's Blade Master, Liu Xiaobi, but even though Liu Xiaobi could reach the required hand speed, his control over the shadows wasn't too good. He could never find the balance between his hand speed and control over the shadows. It was a huge problem that prevented him from improving even further. If he tried to create more shadows, the other side would instantly be able to distinguish between the real and the fake, rendering the skill meaningless. Lu Yuan could reach 8 shadows. Just this number alone was enough to scare everyone foolish, because this was the highest number of shadow steps that anyone had ever accomplished in glory. No one had ever achieved 8 complete shadows. Yi Shu was also surprised for a moment, but after looking at it more carefully, he could tell that, although Lu Yuan could produce 8 shadows, his control wasn't very good, similar to Liu Xiaobi. Of those 8 shadows, Yi Shu could identify 4 of them as fake with a single glance. Compared to Huang Shaoshan's 7 perfect shadows, Lu Yuan's 8 shadows were far from being as effective. However, this was from the perspective of an experienced expert like Yi Shu. Let alone normal players, even pro players that weren't familiar with shadow steps would be frightened by Lu Yuan's 8 shadows. More importantly, Lu Yuan was still young. His high-pitched childish voice proved this loud and clear. How old was he? 13. 14. After a few years of practice, once he trained his control, he might just be able to produce 8 perfect shadows. Although this level of shadow steps might make the others cry out in fear, for Yi Shu, it was far from being anything noteworthy. Yi Shu could instantly see through 4 of the 8 shadows. It would have been more effective for Lu Yuan to produce 5 perfect shadows. Yi Shu's Enlightened Lord stepped to the side. The onlookers watched as he crashed into a shadow. If that was a real one, wouldn't he just be killing himself? Yi Shu ignored everyone's bewilderment. He had naturally devised a plan already. While Enlightened Lord stepped to the side, the cross in his hands lit up. Cleric skills would come out whenever the cross flashed with light. Clerics were mainly healers, but clerics had better offensive capabilities than paladins. They had a few attacking moves that could be used. Hypnosis, Sacred Fire, and Holy Commandment Light. 3 skills were activated consecutively. Hypnosis inflicted sleep on the target. Sacred Fire was a 5-second dot and a 3-second silence. Holy Commandment Light immersed the target in light, causing the target to take 30% more damage from all attacks. The total duration being 6 seconds. These 3 skills were naturally used on the 4 indistinguishable shadows. The shadows of shadow steps were virtual images. Anything tangible would pierce through one on contact. However, Enlightened Lord's equipment wasn't very good, meaning his stats were on the lower side. All 3 skills required cast time. Without any casting speed buffs from his equipment, using all 3 skills before Flowing Cloud reached him wasn't possible. Fortunately, Yi Shu wasn't alone. He had brought Little Cold Hands with him. Little Cold Hands had good perception. Distinguishing between real and fake was his forte. He couldn't compare to Yi Shu though and instantly see through 4 shadows, but during the time it took Yi Shu's Enlightened Lord to step sideways, Little Cold Hands identified 3 as fake. He was still lacking in comparison to Yi Shu. Yi Shu could instantly see through 4, while Little Cold Hands only saw through 3 after some time. He didn't need anyone to tell him what to do though. Little Cold Hand immediately raised his cross and began casting spells. However, he took more time than Yi Shu to find the fake shadows. His control over his character wasn't as good as Yi Shu either. By the time he was about to do something, he was only able to cast a single spell. Little Cold Hands also had better equipment than Enlightened Lord. Although he might not be able to move his hands as quickly, his character casted spells faster. In the end, Little Cold Hands cast a Sacred Fire, while Yishu's Enlightened Lord cast a Hypnosis and a Holy Commandment Light. Lu Yuan had been too rushed, which meant that retreating was more difficult. After the enemy skills arrived, he wasn't able to switch out of the shadow in time. The enemies targeted their skills at troublesome locations. Yishu didn't need to be said. As for Little Cold Hands, this was another one of his strengths. Of the 3 shadows, Hypnosis passed right through one of the shadows. Another shadow wasn't set on fire after stepping on Sacred Fire. The third one began to glow brightly under Holy Commandment Light. That one was without a doubt the real body. Little Cold Hands hastily retreated, but he was still nicked by the enemy sword. Yishu's Enlightened Lord crashed into one of the shadow under the cries of the surrounding onlookers. When Holy Commandment Light glowed around Flowing Cloud's real body, Flowing Cloud was still able to cut Little Cold Hands, but by the time his sword reached Enlightened Lord, it was too late. Lu Yuan's intentions of directly killing Enlightened Lord had been seen through. There were even players jumping out to protect Enlightened Lord now. Holy Commandment Light was a persistent effect spell. The light produced by the spell still covered his body from head to toe. There might be real or fake shadows in shadow steps, but the fake shadows wouldn't just disappear. Thus, when facing shadow steps, if the shadows crisscrossed with each other and switched places, the opponent might lose track. This was the true value behind using shadow steps. The real body might have been identified, but as long as you weren't caught, you could rely on other methods to get out of the tough spot. This was exactly what Lu Yuan did. His 8 shadows suddenly gathered together and then scattered. He thought he would be able to cause the enemies to lose track of his real body, but when he looked at his screen, light surrounded his body. Yishu had accounted for Lu Yuan trying to confuse them. To think you could even see through that. You really are amazing, Lu Yuan exclaimed. He wasn't dispirited though. Shadow steps may have been seen through, but he still didn't cancel the skill. The 8 shadows still charged towards Enlightened Lord. 2 knights protected him. With Holy Commandment Light as a guide, the 2 knights knew very well which shadow was the real one. One of the knights charged forward. Flowing Cloud stepped to the side and that knight ran right past him like a train. The second knight learned from the other knight's mistake. He didn't leave his spot and attack. Then, he heard Yishu shout, "Provoke." The knight wasn't going to ignore God Yishu's instruction. He used Provoke, and Flowing Clouds immediately headed towards him. Lu Yuan saw the knight lift his hands and predicted that he would be provoked. The 8 shadows suddenly gathered together, providing cover for him. The knight swiped his mouse back and forth, but the other shadows were making it too difficult for him to click on the real one. Provoke didn't have any special requirements. The user just had to click on the target and it would hit 100% of the time, but against a pro-level player, this sort of disgusting problem came up. He couldn't click on the target. In Glory, whether it was attacks or skills, the player had to point at the desired target and click to activate the skill. It wasn't like other games, where the game did the aiming for you and all you had to do was press the right key. Glory was widely known for its complex game mechanics. Every attack required the player to control the character. As a result, just clicking on a target to use the skill might not be easy as it sounded. Using the other fake shadows to block the real one from being clicked on was one way. Moving around like a fly also made it difficult for the opponent to predict his movements. An experienced player could figure out when you were about to use your skill based on your movements. If you knew when the opponent would click, if you moved at the same time, wouldn't you cause the opponent to miss? If the opponent missed, the skill would go on cooldown. In this case, the knight's Provoke would miss. The knight was facing a bunch of shadows. Provoke being used on a fake shadow was no different from it being used on thin air. At this moment, he heard God Yichu remind him, "Roar." Right, roar. The knight hastily clicked randomly to release Provoke. Even if he cancelled it, it would go on cooldown, so it didn't matter either way. When he clicked, it missed Flowing Cloud's real body, but the knight quickly followed up with a roar. This skill was even easier. As long as the target was in range, it would hit. Tricks couldn't be used to dodge it. The instant the knight roared, Flowing Cloud immediately turned around and his sword headed for the knight instead. But knights specialized in defense. Even more so, he had many clerics healing him. Of course he wouldn't be afraid of a single strike. He lifted his shield and blocked it. The moment the sword struck the knight, a heal was also cast on the knight. After the attack, Flowing Cloud removed the taunt on himself. When he turned around, Enlightened Lord had already retreated a good distance away. You really are troublesome. Lu Yuan pulled himself together and got ready to chase, but before he could even move 2 steps, another roar came. That knight was a self-made genius. He didn't need Yi Shu to remind him. He activated Knight's Spirit and all his skills went off cooldown. He used a sacrificial roar. The range was even larger. Flowing Cloud had no way of avoiding it and could only run back to attack. That knight was waiting for the attack though. The other players looked at the scene. Isn't he under our control now? Should we go over and kill him? But Yi Shu directly reminded everyone, ignore him. We need to hurry. Enlightened Lord was already prepared to cast heal on that knight. Chapter 729. High-level confrontation. Lu Yuan was helpless. It wasn't like there was no counter to a knight's taunting skills, but Blade Masters had no such method. Lu Yuan could only quietly watch as his Flowing Cloud dashed towards the knight. The knight couldn't avoid the attack, but he was able to disrupt the enemy's rhythm. Taunt skills were quite useful, even in PvP. Roar wasn't a skill limited by time. The target had to hit the target at least once in order to dispel Roar's effects. This knight was quite smart. After roaring, he immediately ran in the other direction. He clearly wanted to delay Lu Yuan from doing anything for as much time as possible. Lu Yuan obviously knew what roar did. Since he had no way of dispelling the effects on his own, he actively chased after the knight. He used triple slash to close the distance and his sword flew towards the fleeing knight. The knight ran, while turning his head back from time to time, but when he turned around, he realized that Flowing Cloud wasn't heading towards him anymore. The onlookers saw things more clearly. Flowing Cloud closed the distance with a triple slash and the tip of his sword had slashed upwards. No one could tell if the attack had hit or not, but Flowing Cloud had already turned around and left. If he turned his head to leave, then his attack clearly hit, but the knight, who had been hit by the attack, hadn't even noticed it. He was still looking back foolishly. How light was that attack? That kid really didn't want to waste any time. Flowing Cloud headed towards Enlightened Lord again, but before he could even take 3 steps, Flowing Cloud turned around and headed back once more. Who is it this time? Lu Yuan cried. This time, Flowing Cloud had been provoked. That knight from before didn't have any taunt skills off cooldown yet, but there were still plenty of knights among the Alliance's troops to take his place. Provoke's duration was based on time and not by attack. This time, Lu Yuan's Flowing Cloud didn't charge towards the provoker as decisively. Instead, he made sure Flowing Cloud didn't rush out too much. As he moved around, he hacked wildly at the players that were hurrying past, but they all ignored him. A lone individual's strength compared to a group of players could be seen here. No matter how skilled Lu Yuan might be, or how powerful his equipment was, facing such a huge army, if the army chose to ignore him, there was nothing he could do about it. The troops finally realized why Yi Shu ordered them to completely ignore Lu Yuan. If they had tried to kill Flowing Cloud, they might have the numbers to do so, but they might not be able to catch him. Instead, they might even be led around by the nose. However, should they completely ignore him and treat him as an annoying fly who constantly tickled them, the fly would never be able to kill them, so they could still endure it. They practically played the game for a living, yet they didn't have as much in-game experience as a pro god. But they soon felt at ease. They might be familiar with the game, but they had never encountered such a high-level expert before, so they obviously had no idea how to deal with him. For this type of battle, someone who was familiar with both the game and the pro scene like God Yi Chu was more suited to lead them. Lu Yuan was certainly in a pitiful position. The Alliance troops continued to hurry over, but Flowing Cloud. The knights were all lined up to deal with him. After one provoke ended, another provoke would come. After one roar ended, another roar came. Once their skills went on cooldown, boom, Knight Spirit activated and their skills would refresh. And the cycle would continue. Every knight could taunt him 4 times. And how many knights were there in the 4 Guild Alliance's troops? Lu Yuan was stuck in an infinite loop. Flowing Cloud ran around and jumped to the left and right, hacking and slashing, but all it led to was the other side laughing out loud. After understanding the reason why, the players no longer thought of him as annoying, but rather they found it hilarious messing around with him. Lu Yuan constantly shouted, "Ah ah ah," in anger, but what could he do? It had nothing to do with him not being good enough. Blade Masters just didn't have any way of dealing with taunt skills. Yi Shu and Little Cold Hands were personally supporting everyone too. Every time Lu Yuan happened to grasp an opportunity, Yi Shu and Little Cold Hands always found some way to steal it away from him. Lu Yuan was tossed about back and forth. In the end, he failed to delay them for very long. The Alliance troops soon reached the battlefield. Blue Brook Guild hadn't been able to move the boss anywhere, because they had enemies. Samsara and Seaside had arrived as well. The three sides were fighting with each other for the boss. Blue Brook Guild had arrived first though. Their guild was stronger too, so the boss was currently under their control. However, trying to move the boss away while facing two enemy guilds wasn't a very likely possibility. In addition, most guilds wouldn't even think of moving a level 55 boss anyways. They would just kill the boss quickly. The hardest part was the PvP. If they could hurry up and kill the boss off, there wouldn't be any problems. There was no need to go into a you live or I die situation with the other guilds. The battle for the boss was fairly normal. Blue River was very worried about Yi Chu's group though. After Lu Yuan heard about his worries, he volunteered to delay them and win Blue Brook Guild some time. Blue River thought about it. Lu Yuan was very capable. Even though he was alone, he should be able to give them some trouble. Even if the other side killed him, it should take them quite some time to do so. If they could be delayed, they had a much higher chance of snatching the boss. As a result, Lu Yuan was sent out. His ambush was indeed sharp and incisive, but he failed to accomplish his goal. The enemy troops completely ignored him and continued to hurry over. Lu Yuan knew why he had come here, but he couldn't do anything. Being controlled by such a disgusting method was truly quite upsetting. Blue River immediately noticed the Alliance troops arriving. His heart thumped. That was quick. Did Lu Yuan fail? Blue River thought to himself. He soon saw Lu Yuan's flowing cloud though. He was in the middle of the enemy troops being tossed around by a bunch of knights like a dog. Blue River immediately understood. Lu Yuan's flowing cloud was being completely controlled by this method. Thinking of how the little kid had been played around with like a toy, Blue River wanted to apologize. I was too careless. How could I underestimate Yi Chu? Lu Yuan was still just a child and I pushed him into a bunch of bullies. I sent a sheep into a tiger's den. Seeing how pitiful of a situation Flowing Cloud was in, Blue River hastily dispatched people to rescue him. A few classes had skills which could negate the effects of Provoke and Roar. For example, Knights had a movable mountain, Chi Masters had Calm and Composed, which nullified taunts. Blue River was about to go and personally rescue him, but when the Alliance troops arrived at the battlefield, they suddenly scattered. He no longer knew Flowing Cloud's location. Before he could find him again, another guild had arrived, Tyrannical Ambition. No guild would ever give up a wild boss, but Yi Shu was left speechless when he saw the cleric leading Tyrannical Ambition's troops. Are you serious, Zhang Jinji? You're leading the troops to take a level 55 wild boss? Can't you give us poor people a way out? Yi Shu shouted at them. Misty Mountains. This cleric on Tyrannical Ambition's side wore a full set of top in-game gear too. After fighting all day yesterday, all of the guilds learned the news. This cleric was Team Tyranny's Zhang Jinji. How else could Tyrannical Ambition have been so dominant yesterday? When Yi Shu shouted at Tyrannical Ambition, Blue River also noticed them. He immediately wanted to run away. King Hell. Two bosses spawned at the same time and both gods ran over for the level 55 one. Are you serious? Both of you want the easy pickings? Instead of going for the harder level 65 boss, you all ran over to fight with our reserve troops? Blue River turned his head to look at his troops. Their side only consisted of reserve troops. Not just Blue Brook Guild though. Samsara and Seaside weren't leading their elite troops either. Blue River was an elite player. He often met with the other guild elites, so he was very familiar with them. Zhang Jinji's Misty Mountains led the way. When he looked at the enemy troops, he saw Enlightened Lord. He was also surprised when Yi Shu shouted at him. There's something I need from here. Zhang Jinji's reason was the same as Yi Shu's. You need something from here? Is old Han switching equipment? Yi Shu guessed. Scarlet Cloud Taoist writes Red Ribbon Janna mainly used grappler skills, but the boss also knew a few striker skills. Although the materials that dropped from a boss didn't necessarily depend on the boss's class, they usually were. Just because Zhang Jinji needed something from Red Ribbon Janna, it didn't mean that Team Tyranny wanted to create new striker equipment, but since Zhang Jinji was personally leading the troops, Yi Shu was obviously thinking of a higher meaning. Team Tyranny's striker, Desert Dust, was their most powerful character. Team Secret, Zhang Jinji didn't tell Yi Shu. As he spoke, he had already given orders to his troops. Tyrannical ambition didn't bring their elite troops either. Zhang Jinji clearly thought that they wouldn't encounter anyone too troublesome for a level 55 boss, so it should be more than enough if he led a few troops, but when he saw Yi Shu unexpectedly there, he felt his head ache a bit. Yesterday, the Alliance wasn't able to beat Tyrannical ambition in any of the fights, but that wasn't because of Zhang Jinji alone. Yi Shu wasn't any worse than him in terms of leading. As a result, the deciding factor was Tyrannical ambition's overall strength. However, he didn't bring Tyrannical ambition's elite troops with him, while the other side brought their core forces. Tyrannical ambition had no advantage this time. Blue Brook Guild, Samsara, and Seaside were in an even more awkward situation. They were still attacking the boss, while Tyrannical ambition and the Alliance argued with each other as if they didn't exist, but with Yi Chu and Zhang Jinji there, so what if they were ignored? How could they object? They were currently fighting the boss though. Wouldn't it be a bit too shameful to suddenly flee? Chapter 730. Blue River's Suicide Squad. Blue Brook Guild, Samsara, and Seaside were in an awkward situation. It seemed pointless to try to fight. One of the two gods was going to end up taking the boss, but retreating felt too shameful. Even though you could say, oh, we came across two gods, just fleeing at the sight of them was too cowardly, no? If word spread, it could easily turn into one team being afraid of the other team. That wouldn't be acceptable. As a result, although the three guilds felt uneasy, they had no choice but to continue fighting foolishly. Even if they knew that they had no chance in the end, they still had to follow the proper steps. Being a club guild came with its own problems. Meanwhile, Tyrannical ambition and the Alliance stood opposite from each other. The atmosphere was quite heavy, but neither side moved. The respective group chats on both sides were filled with messages though. Yi Shu and Zhang Jinji were currently rearranging their troops. From a communication perspective, Tyrannical ambition had the clear advantage. Zhang Jinji could use the guild chat to give everyone orders. It was more troublesome for Yi Shu's side though. The four guilds each had their own troops. He had to type instructions into the QQ chat group and then have the guild leaders pass down the orders to their own respective troops. The first one to move in the end was Tyrannical ambition. The Tyrannical ambition troops split into two. One half moved into a defensive formation like a wall, blocking off Yi Shu's side from the battlefield. The other half directly joined the chaotic boss fight and started contesting against the other three guilds. The first to make a move may have grasped the initiative, but it also revealed their strategy. The last to make a move could come up with a more direct countermeasure. Of course, as one of the four master tacticians, Zhang Jinji had already accounted for it. Tyrannical ambition acted swiftly, not wanting to give the other side enough time to respond. Although the defensive side created a wall, they didn't just stand there and wait. They rushed towards Yi Shu's side, as if wanting to push them out of the battle. The other side had to respond to an attack from the front. Zhang Jinji hoped Yi Shu would directly contend with them and crash into the wall. Zhang Jinji didn't think that they would be able to completely block the enemy troops, but he only needed to buy time. It was only a level 55 boss. With their level advantage, they should be able to kill it very quickly. It had to be said that Blue River's initial plan was no different from Zhang Jinji's. However, he had overestimated the influence that an individual could make on the battlefield and tried to allow Lu Yu stall the enemy troops by himself. However, the following events proved that, in front of a well-organized group, an individual's strength was too insignificant to matter. How were things going for Lu Yuan's flowing cloud? Not many were paying attention to him anymore. Even Blue River, who had originally been leading the rescue team, ran back dejectedly to fight against the boss after seeing the two forces collide. How's it going, little Lu? Blue River could only message Lu Yuan to let the other know that he hadn't been forgotten. Yi Chu really is a difficult opponent. Not only did he see through the flaw in my shadow steps, he even used night taunt skills to put a collar on me. Lu Yuan liked to use exclamation marks, making it sound like he was always excited. The words "put a collar on me" made Blue River sweat. This little kid really had a way with words. What type of person do you regard yourself as? Can you hold on? Blue River asked. They don't seem to want to waste the time to kill me, Lu Yuan replied. Yeah, they've got a formidable opponent, Blue River said. Who? Lu Yuan asked. Zhang Jinji, Tyrannical Ambition's vice-captain, Blue River replied. Ah, the one who's a master tactician like Yi Chu and Shao Shikan. That Zhang Jinji, Lu Yuan exclaimed. That's him. I should go watch and learn from them. What are you doing right now? Blue River was a bit depressed. Lu Yuan didn't seem to be very busy. He was chatting quite happily. There's no point in doing anything anymore. It depends on what they want to do. Lu Yuan finally expressed his helplessness. He clearly felt powerless in this type of situation. Don't worry. I'll think of some way to rescue you, Blue River said. He circled around with his small rescue squad. With those two gods competing, was there any point in trying to contest for the boss? Not at all. Blue River felt like if he could stop those two gods with his troops, he would be qualified to take Yu Wenzhou's shot-calling position in Team Blue Rain. Blue River clearly knew his own capabilities. Although he didn't say it out loud, he had already given up on the boss, but he wasn't the type to do things so half-heartedly. If Lu Yuan wasn't deep within the enemy's ranks, he would still definitely be trying his hardest to lead his troops, but since that wasn't the case, Blue River just sent a suicide squad into the enemy ranks. As for the fight with the other guilds, he had someone else take over. When that someone else heard the arrangements, he nearly pissed himself. If he didn't know about Bluebridge Spring Snow's kind reputation, he would have thought that Bluebridge was leaving everyone to sacrifice themselves so he could run away safely. Facing Zhang Jinji and Yi Chu was too heavy of a responsibility. Try your best, Blue River was quite serious, we're going to go rescue little Lu. Blue River led his suicide squad away. Meanwhile, the two forces had already began clashing with each other. All sorts of skills flew and players were blown away everywhere one looked. The two master tacticians lived up to their names. Blue River doubted that he could grasp the mind games being played, so he simply watched as if it were a movie scene. At the same time, he circled around the back with his suicide squad and found a rooftop to jump onto. The squad leapt up and then lay on their bellies, crawling until they got to the edges of the rooftop to look down covertly. How terrible. Lu Yuan was having a hard time. Yi Shu's group was fighting against tyrannical ambition. The knights were the defensive core of the troops. How could they not be used? As a result, they didn't have the manpower to keep Lu Yuan under control, but leaving a skilled expert like Lu Yuan alone was the same as lighting their own backyard on fire. They had to kill him off. Being restricted by taunts, Lu Yuan was truly struggling to survive. It was only because his skill level was much higher than a normal player's that he managed to still alive. A normal player would have died many times over by now. Even so, Flowing Cloud was just barely hanging on by a thread. Buff him, Blue River hastily ordered. A knight and a chi master rushed forward immediately. Protect, Blue River ordered. He led the way and jumped down from the rooftop with a falling light blade. The other squad members occupied the high ground and released their long-ranged attacks. The knight and chi master also leapt down with Blue River. The knight used a heroic leap, while the chi master used slipstream. Along with Blue River and the other squad members, they began to fight fiercely. These 10 players had come out of nowhere. They really did surprise the Alliance players. However, over here, 100-player groups were the unit of measurement. 10 players weren't anything to be afraid of, unless the 10 were all pro players. That wasn't possible though. The entire Team Blue Rain being dispatched for a level 55 wild boss? A commemoration for the level 55 era would be more believable. Ah, leader. The kid had good eyes. The sudden ambush surprised everyone, including Lu Yuan, but once he looked at them, he noticed Bluebridge Sprint Snow among them, who descended with a falling light blade. Unfortunately, the falling light blade didn't hit anyone. The surrounding players had all scattered to avoid it. Leader, you used your falling light blade WAAAYY too early, Lu Yuan criticized Blue River. Shut up, Blue River blushed. He had to admit though. He really had used his skill too early, but that was to show off their strength, right? Buff, Blue River roared. Understood. The knight and the Chi master had been brought over by Blue River to get Lu Yuan out of his current predicament. Just one was enough actually. If their buffs overlapped, it wouldn't extend the duration or anything. Blue River still brought 2 over for insurance. Heroic Leap and Slipstream both had slight AoE effects, so the surrounding enemies dodged the attacks, giving the 2 players time to buffs Flowing Cloud. A Movable Mountain. Calm and composed. When these 2 skills were used, a knight from the 4-guild alliance used a roar, affecting the entire Suicide Squad, except for Flowing Cloud. Lu Yuan's Flowing Cloud had one of the 2 buffs, so he wouldn't be affected by taunts. You go first, Blue River shouted. Then what about you guys? Lu Yuan said. We'll come back from the revival point. Blue River said the truth and expressed how they might not be able to escape, but at the same time, he reminded Lu Yuan, this was a game. If we die, we can just come back. Don't try to be a hero from a drama and insist on dying with everyone else. We're too old for that sort of thing. Don't jump to conclusions. Buff me and I'll bring you guys out. Why'd you bring so few people? Lu Yuan didn't leave Blue River and the others. His words sounded quite heroic, making Blue River feel ashamed. He came here thinking that he would die. Had he been thinking too negatively? Headwind Strike. Flowing Cloud's sword began to glow as he tried to open a path for these 10 players. The 10 players were affected by Roar, so they all pounced towards that knight. Before reaching the knight, they were already attacking. If their attacks hit, Roar would disappear. These 10 were experienced players. They had already reached this stage. How could they let the knight go so easily? The 10 surrounded him. He brought it upon himself. Even if they couldn't kill him, they could put more pressure on the healers and force their healing skills to go on cooldown. Go! Blue River and the other 9 players were still beating up that knight when they heard Lu Yuan's shout. They turned their heads. Minnesota. In such a short amount of time, there were already quite a few players in front of Flowing Cloud, who were swaying unsteadily. How many skills had he used? Afterwards, he used Shadow Steps. This was the Suicide Squad's first time seeing it. They gasped in shock. 8 shadows. There was no Yi Shu here this time. These 8 shadows were like 8 real shadows to the normal players. The enemies were panicked. One of the enemy knights was about to use Roar, but the knight in the Suicide Squad activated Night Spirit and reapplied a movable mountain on Lu Yuan. Roar wasn't going to work. Flowing Cloud forced open a path. The 10 players followed behind him. The knights, who still wanted to taunt them, didn't have any methods left. There weren't many knights left either. We got out. Ha ha, Lu Yuan quickly rushed out. Blue River was ecstatic as well, but at this moment, he received a message from the substitute group leader, we can't hold on. The boss has been snatched away. Their enemies weren't any slower.